Um, I should have my traffic officer on here also.
Yes. Hello. How you doing, Officer Chu?
Ready to go, Kelly.
Okay. Let's get started. Welcome to the Tuesday, June 30th meeting of the Albany Common Council's Public Safety Committee. We will be taking up ordinance number 126220. It's an ordinance amending chapter 42 of part 1 of the code, creating a new article regarding police department interactions. It's a language we want to add to the standard field sobriety tests. For the record, okay, perfect. So I can't, you just changed it, so I can only see a few people, but I know, okay, yeah. Yeah, for the record, myself, committee members Tom Hoey, Joseph Igo, Alfredo Ballerin, and Sonia Frederick are here from the committee. We also have council members Jamel Robinson, council president Corey Ellis, Corp Counsel Brett Williams, our Chief Police, Chief Hawkins, Officer Richard Chu, who does a lot of the DWI arrests in the department. Did I leave off? Council Member Farrell is also here with us. Hopefully I didn't forget anyone else. And Ms. Badham, who offered, who actually provided a lot of assistance in crafting this legislation and helping us with this stuff. So I think I got, and then staff-wise, City Clerk, Danielle Gillespie, our Research Counsel, J.R. Pichardo, and our Senior Legislative Aide, Michelle Andre. We're all here. So we're talking about Ordinance 126220. What I will do, and there is public comment. That's why Ms. Badham is here. I don't know if anyone else will join us at some point. So what I want to do is just have the sponsors kind of, lay out their idea and their thoughts about the legislation, and then we'll get the police chief and Officer Chu on after that. So Mr. Robinson, Ballerin, or Ms. Frederick?
I guess I'll start first. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so this particular ordinance follows the resolution that was passed by the council regarding standardized field sobriety tests being done in all languages. This ordinance is a first step into getting at least the language, Spanish language, which is one of the most, I believe, one of the most common languages spoken here in the capital region, into an ordinance form so that we can begin the steps of moving forward to create more equitable interactions with the APD, as we can see in the current climate of what's going on in our nation, that even the small misunderstandings can lead to, interactions that can potentially lead to death. And so we want to ensure that we are doing our due diligence as a city council, and also as the constituents and residents of this city, to ensure that there is equity and across all departments.
Okay, Councilmember Doche has also joined us for the record, and I can't see if anyone else. I think that's it. So, Ms. Frederick or Mr. Ballerin, if you all want to add any thing to that. No. Okay. All right.
Wait,
so, okay. All
I
right.
apologize for that. It took me a second to get myself off of mute and on and back in the camera. I really want to thank, again, Councilman Robinson and Frederick, as well as the attorney, Brenda, that worked on this. As many of you know, the Latino population is one of the fastest growing populations in New York State. You know, even, and it's makes up approximately a little less than a quarter of the population for our state, roughly around 7 to 8% for our city. You know, and you can see that even in our own council. You know, back in 2007, we had no Latino representatives. Today we have 2. So this bill is there to make sure that if residents have family or residents themselves don't speak the language, or it's not the first language, that there is a system in place when they're dealing with the criminal justice system to make sure that it's fair. For anyone who English is not their first language, it can be difficult when you're put in a situation that is tough. I think Brenda did a really wonderful job at the last council meeting showcasing how if someone's speaking to you in a different language, and even if you understand it, I understand Spanish, but if I was dealing with a legal matter, I wouldn't want to be spoken to in Spanish. I'd want English because I have a better domination of English than I do Spanish. So I think it's important that we have that same opportunity for residents and other visitors. I mean, because we are the capital of New York State, it means a lot of people come from all over the state to our city. And we want to make sure that they have a fair shot and a fair opportunity when being judged at something as serious as this. So I thank you again, Councilmember Robinson, Councilmember Frederick, and you know, the attorney Brenda, who brought this together.
I'll jump in. I'll be brief. Just want to thank Councilmember Robinson and Councilmember Ballerin for putting this forward, and Brenda as well for her hard work. As stated during the council meeting prior for the resolution, the anxiety and the fear that goes into an individual when they're being pulled over and up for a potential sobriety test can double, if not triple, if it has language as a barrier. So this is very important that we put this into our city law. And I think that the police force is already practicing some of this today, but it's very important that we put it into our city law so that we really send a message to our community that we're listening and we're here and we accept everyone who has different languages and we're going to be fair and just.
Okay, so at this point, I'd like maybe the chief to speak to what they may or may not be doing at this point. And after that, I'll have Officer Chu maybe speak to some of his interactions with non-English speakers that would maybe help us with our understanding of what we're doing here. So, Chief?
All right, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. And I think this is some important legislation. I think it's important that the police department is sensitive to everybody in the community, and this is certainly an area that some extra sensitivity can be exercised. And so we have no objections to this legislation. We think it's something that's well written, well researched, and well intended. And I think now, and I'll simply turn this over to Rich because Officer Chu has some ideas on how we can facilitate the practical application of this legislation.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
So, standardized field sobriety tests is kind of a difficult realm to dabble in because everything is systematic and standardized nationwide. So to ask the average officer that's never spoke Spanish in their life, it'd be a difficult task. One of the ideas that I brought up is something that the NYPD utilizes. Because the NYPD serves such a diverse community that they have the standardized field sobriety test pre-recorded on video in every language. So to start this up, the idea that I gave was that we're going to start out with the Spanish-speaking standardized field sobriety test, have them pre-recorded on a video by a Spanish-speaking officer, and I could reach out to my contacts in the Department of Criminal Justice Services to assist us with that, so that the subject being tested could be played this video, and therefore there would be no miscommunication on their part, and it won't hinder the court process by causing any loopholes for the case to be dismissed on the police side of it. I was previously working on the project before this pandemic on actually redoing the English standardized field sobriety testing with Department of Criminal Justice Services that we were going to deliver statewide. And this is something that we could do with the Spanish standardized field sobriety testing as well. Also, arrests aren't based just on standardized field sobriety testing. There's a number of things that officers have to make their decision on, observations, driving behaviors. So right now with the DWI arrest process, as far as Spanish speaking, officers do their best to attempt to deliver that standardized field sobriety testing. There's not always going to be the same communication, but they can make their decision based on some of those other observations that they're noticing, as the odor of alcohol, observing an odor of alcoholic beverage emanating off their breath, stuttering speech, unable to stand up, unsteadiness on their feet. There's so many behaviors that we teach officers to look for when they're making an arrest. As far as driving, driving gives off a lot of clues. Standardized field sobriety testing assists the officer in putting together a case evidentiary for evidence, but it doesn't have to be based on that alone. But if we're looking to make the standardized field sobriety testing process more understanding for that, my personal opinion would be to do what the NYPD does and make videos. I don't know if you guys have any questions or any comments on that. But that's if I could give you any more insight on the DWI process, but that's pretty much what I came up with.
Right. So just what we'll do is any committee members first. We'll have you guys answer ask questions, and then we'll move on to the rest of the members. Anyone have questions? I mean, I have a question. So just walking us through the process right now. So do you speak Spanish or?
Funny that you say that. My wife is actually Mexican, but I do not.
Okay. So running through it. So how do you communicate with a person that doesn't speak English?
So I know broken Spanish, but I wouldn't say that I know enough to be able to comfortably walk someone through the standardized field sobriety test. So if we have a Spanish-speaking officer on duty, I ask them to come to my stops. And what I would do, because you'll notice that most of the patrol doesn't even, they don't make DWI arrests because they're so busy answering so many calls, and everything has to be standardized systematic. So if you just mess up the verbiage alone, it could actually hinder the case. So what I would do is I give the language sentence by sentence to that officer, and then have them say that in Spanish. There are cases where I haven't had a Spanish-speaking officer, and I do my best to try and get them to do the test. And at that point, if they cannot do the test, I do not go forward to standardized field sobriety testing, and I arrest them on the common law DWI just based on observations.
Okay, and so is there a card that you read phrases or comments, directions from, or you just is it just kind of a winging it thing?
Are you asking for English?
I'm saying no for Spanish. If you don't have
Spanish,
the officer,
there's no card whatsoever.
There's no card that with any language or sentences.
No, we only administer the officers English cards.
Okay.
So I'm unaware if there are any Spanish-speaking cards, across the country. But as far as what the Department of Criminal Justice Services provides us to provide officers with in the academy when we teach them is all English language cards.
Okay. All right, so other members, the members of the committee. Mr. Hoey.
Yes, one of my questions, and it sounded like a great idea, could we have like YouTube videos? Because everybody has, has these smartphones where you could play, exactly what's going on in almost any language that's available. And I don't know, legally, would that be allowed?
I don't know if YouTube would be allowed, and plus I wouldn't see it as a secure basis of providing that information to the public. But my idea would be is we make these videos and maybe we put them on we leave them on a tablet or something that we leave at the stations. So if we run across that case, someone could grab that tablet with those videos and bring it to the scene and play it line by line for that subject that's being tested, or even leave it at, even if we just have one and we leave it at the booking area, because to make an arrest for DWI, you just need to meet no common law observations, and you could test them later on down at the station with the standardized field sobriety test. Does it cause a little bit more of an issue? Yes, but is it easily articulable to be able to explain in court why that was the case? I would see that as being easy to articulate, because would you rather us bring them down to the station and provide them with easily understandable instructions, or just provide an arrest and test them without them understanding what they're being tested for or how to do the test properly?
Right. So, any committee member, Mr. Igo?
Yeah. Now, is Criminal Justice Services working on something to go statewide that everybody could just, hook up to on the phone? That seems the way. I mean, someone told me, I don't know what the number of languages that are spoken in Albany schools right now. There are an awful lot of them. So it seemed to me it would be practical if you could just, if you can find out the language that the person speaks, sometimes that could be difficult. It would say Swahili or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But so, there was that, you could go to something, dial it up, and that could read out to them for a start.
To my knowledge, Department of Criminal Justice Services has not been working on this yet. So the standardized field sobriety tests that we have been delivering to recruits in the police academy, New York statewide, are actually from officers from different states. And we've noticed that they haven't been detailed towards how New York State officers deliver standardized field sobriety testing, as well as there are a lot of they're not done properly. So when we show them to the recruits, we have to be like, well, this is not how it's done. This is how it's done. So I myself and two other officers, a New York State trooper and a Columbia County sheriff, have been working with the Department of Criminal Justice Services in remaking those standardized field sobriety testing videos for New York State, as far as statewide. And we discussed about making videos with other languages, but that is probably in the foreseeable future and undetermined when they would be able to get that done. If we did the Spanish speaking videos, and we would probably be the basis to be able to provide those statewide and be the leading department to do that in New York State.
Well, that sounds good. But now this lady that spoke to us in one of the meetings, Kelly, she said that there's something that basically we can call in on now. There are interpreters that...
So, yes, that is the language hotline.
Yeah.
So the language hotline is something that we utilize as translations. But so we've utilized it down at the station. So like if we have to read them their Miranda rights, or if, like to tell them if they need to call a lawyer for the breath test. But it's hard to, I've ran into a lot of issues like where like different dialects or, haven't worked out, or even tried to find someone that's on duty at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning to deliver those translations. And here's the thing, those are civilians. So they're not familiar with standardized field sobriety testing. So if something needed to be explained further, I could see it as an issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Right, and it's just not the practicality of it. In real time, you're on the side of the road, you're out in the middle of the night trying to conduct this test. That language line is just not, it's not really equipped to deal in those instances from my experience.
I think if we start with the Spanish, it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
See how that goes, and go from there, and keep working with DCJS or whatever. But.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to have our police department lead the way. I mean, we lead on a lot of things here. So putting out a packet or a group of videos that led the way in the field sobriety test in multi languages would be awesome if we could do something like that. Who's anyone else? Questions? Mr.
Brett
Bauer.
Williams has his hand up.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, Brett.
I do, but if I'd rather have council members and committee members have the opportunity to speak first if they'd like to.
Mr. Bauer.
You can go first, Brett.
Thank you, council member. Yeah, I just wanted to add a few comments on sort of the practicalities of the legislation. And I want to start by saying that I think this is an important piece of legislation, and it's aiming at achieving a noble goal. Just from a practical standpoint, I do have a few concerns, some of which Officer Chu and Chief Hawkins addressed. I think the option of providing videos is probably preferable to doing a call-in service because, Councilmember Igo, my concern with a call-in service would be sort of authenticating the translation. Would you have to put the translator on the stand in a trial or something like that? So that would be a concern from that aspect. With regard to the videos, I do have a concern about sort of question and answer functionality. And I should say too that when I was in private practice, I did DWI defense for 4 or 5 years. So I am at least a little familiar with these things. And even for a sober English speaker, the directions for standardized field sobriety tests can be fairly confusing. So I think the drawback of a video system would be that there's no question and answer functionality. So if an officer were even to ask a suspect if they understood the videos, in the event that the suspect didn't understand an aspect of the video, there wouldn't be that ability to have a back and forth conversation about what the officer is looking for with the test. So that's a concern I have with that, although on the whole, I think videos would be a better option than, say, a call-in service. Also, standardized field sobriety tests are sort of just a small piece of making a DWI arrest, which Officer Chu alluded to, I think. You also have the option in certain cases of performing non-standardized field sobriety tests. So it's like, a finger to nose test or an alphabet test. And I don't know what the City of Albany's practice on those specifically is, but just as with standardized field sobriety tests, those non-standardized tests can be used as evidence that there is probable cause to make an arrest. So, should those be required to be given in Spanish as well if they're going to be administered? I have the same concern with a pre-screen breath test, or what's more commonly known as a breathalyzer, which is administered at the roadside. And if a suspect refuses to submit to a breathalyzer test, they can actually be charged with a criminal violation under Section 1194 of the Vehicle and Traffic Law. I shouldn't call it a criminal violation, excuse me. It's just a violation, similar to a traffic ticket, but still it's something that someone can be charged with for refusing to submit to. And yeah, I think Officer Chu alluded to the fact that there are other indications of whether somebody is impaired or not. So I guess my concern is just that the broader interaction with the police isn't necessarily going to be carried out entirely in Spanish. It's just this one portion that the law is going to address. And, maybe that's something to address down the road, but just wanted to raise that point. As well with chemical tests that are administered back at the station, perhaps the council would want to look at requiring those to be given in Spanish as well. And then just in terms of the timeline for the legislation, I know Michelle and JR reached out to both the public defender's office and the district attorney's office. And of course, Ms. Badan is a former assistant district attorney herself. But I think it would be important to get some input from both of those offices before passing legislation. And as it's currently written, the ordinance shall take effect 30 days after its enactment into law. Certainly to get any sort of program in place like the videos that Officer Chu mentioned, that could take some time. So I would just encourage the council to maybe forbear on passing this until a program is actually in place rather than passing the legislation, having it go into effect, and then working on a program after that.
Mr. Igo?
Has the body cameras that the police officers have been wearing had any effect on arrest? Or would they make things simpler in any way? I don't know. Brett? No.
Yeah. Well, Joe, yeah, they're certainly helpful, because they do provide some video evidence for us. It helps us to when they have to recreate or formulate their police reports and things like that. So body-worn cameras are an important piece of evidence in a lot of cases like this.
Yeah, I just didn't know in the DWIs if there's been any problems in court cases in the county, which maybe we get some info from, like you said, the defender's office or DA's office.
So,
I think it's a good step forward, Kelly, piece of legislation, but I do listen to the concerns about the effective date on it for sure.
Okay, Mr. Ballerin, Mr. O'Shea, then Mr. Robinson. All right, Mr. Ballerin.
Thank you. Two things. One, the cards that in English. How hard would it be to get those cards translated to Spanish so that you could have at least those two cards, translated, as well as how difficult would it be to get a copy of the video that NYPD is currently using, and use that in the meantime. My only concern with just waiting to implement it is I have seen that sometimes when things get tabled or pushed, it just never happens, and I would hate for that to occur here. So I'd like to see what steps we could take to try to implement it in 30 days, 60 days, but really be looking at a way for us to do this in a more aggressive manner, especially since we know there's other departments that are already doing it, that we can, piggyback on what's worked in New York City. And in New York City, there are communities that if you go in, and you don't know Spanish, you are gonna have a real tough time interacting and getting things that you want, because it's all Spanish speaking. If you go to certain parts of Washington Heights and different parts of New York City, everything is in Spanish. Everyone's communicating in Spanish. That's why those communities are there. So I'm pretty confident NYPD has been, dealing with this for decades. And I'm sure we can easily, piggyback on what they already have.
Okay, Mr. O'Shea.
Actually, I'd like to defer to Councilmember Robinson since he's one of the sponsors of this.
Okay, yep, Mr. Robinson.
Oh, no, I was just going to bring up the point that Alfredo brought up, that, there is a model that already exists. It's not like, we're creating something from scratch. I think we can utilize that model and then tweak it according to what we need. And I think, a 30-day period I'm competent that we have, great officers and staff on the APD who can, make this happen within that time frame. So I don't think that is something that I would be worried about and for implementation within that 30-day, after that 30-day time frame.
And now, Judy, you want to?
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts on this. That's one of the confusions I'm having. One of the questions I was having is, if New York City is already doing this, why would we make a new video? That's the first.
Can I just say, so when I heard about the NYPD videos, it was probably about 6 years ago when I went through DRE school, and they were doing that back in the 90s with VHS tapes. I don't know where they took it to this point in time. I just know that it's been done in the past through VHS tapes, and they paid a substantial amount of money for those videotapes. And it was for all the languages. I think the guy, one of the officers was telling me it was close to almost like $100,000 or $200,000 for those videotapes. I don't know what they're doing to this point. Like I said, when I had the chance to go to DRE school 6 years ago, we go with agencies from all across the country. And at that point, that's what NYP, when I asked them what they do in that case, they said they had video that their traffic officers would show down at their traffic station. At this point in time, I am unaware of what they do. I don't know if they enhanced it with digital videos or not. That would be something that would have to be looked into.
So I guess, so that answers my second question, which is, why are we talking about how we might do something with a tablet versus having something like on a phone, etc.? Why don't we find out what New York City is already doing and find out what their experience is with regard to challenges in court, etc., and use that to inform us and move us forward. I'm a little concerned about us waiting to do sort of like a video production kind of thing on our own, and the editing of the script that goes into that. I would imagine, with regard to some of what Brett is talking about, with regard to interaction back and forth and do you understand things, I would think that a video could show somebody walking a line, or following a light of the eyes, or whatever it else is that is part of this, and all that would be better, I think, than doing nothing now that people are being unsure of what people understand or not understand. So I'm a little bit confused about that part of it too. As an attorney, it seems to me as though this has got to be an improvement in terms of either potential prosecution or non-prosecution. The other thing that I want to say is the idea of having, in terms of providing input, I do think we should be able to move forward rather swiftly, finding out what New York City is doing and following that model. But with regard to the idea of a tablet being back in the station with the videos on it, etc., in terms of equity, I think that we should be looking at trying to treat the experience as much as we would for the same as for a non-English speaker. Why penalize people by holding them roadside or forcing them to go back to the station when an English speaker would be able to move forward with the test and either be released or be processed at that particular point in time. So I have a concern about having somebody jump through a lot more hoops in order to be able to do the field sobriety test, which then is no longer a field sobriety test.
There aren't actually a lot more hoops, and it's not a preference. There's not giving a preference to English speaking versus non-English speaking, because an officer can make an arrest based on their observations and driving observations and physical observations alone. So you wouldn't be given a non-English speaking officer, a non-English speaking subject, a lot more hoops to jump through, because they could still be arrested based on the common law of 11923. What we're talking about is just adding extra evidence in. So standardized field sobriety test testing is just a small piece of DWI arrests. Phase 1 is observing the vehicle in motion. You know, when you're observing a vehicle violating the vehicle and traffic law, and you know you're observing unnatural driving behavior. Then you make the stop, and phase 2 is a personal contact. You're smelling that odor of alcoholic beverage. You know, you hear some slurring, slow responses to, you know, questions, just physical movements. And when you ask them to step out of the vehicle, you're watching to see if they're, you know, they're stuttering their step, if they're, you know, not able to balance on themselves. And then all that standardized field sobriety testing does is just, it gives the person to prove that they're not intoxicated. But there's so many more observations going along with it. So you're not actually asking a non-English speaking person, first English speaking person, to jump through more hoops, because you can do the same. I've done the same with English speaking people in like bad weather conditions. Like if there's like a lot of snow on the ground, you know, it'd be unfair to that person to make them do standardized field sobriety testing with 4 inches of snow on the ground. So I would make that arrest based on my observations, which is 11923 common law. And then I would give them a chance to do standardized field sobriety testing at the station.
So I guess you know, interesting comments, but I also see a little bit of a flip side in that. I guess my question to you is, how often do you decide to administer a field sobriety test and then let the person go?
So there have been incidents where I've done standardized field sobriety testing, and during that standardized field sobriety testing, you learn that a person may be diabetic, which gives off the same symptoms of someone that may be intoxicated, or maybe a person has 2 drinks, right, which doesn't necessarily make them intoxicated. And I see that their physical motions, that they're able to walk a straight line, they're able to balance, and although they've had 2 drinks, they're not actually impaired. So there have been incidents where I have been like, okay, you're okay to drive, and you're on your way.
Okay, so my point is the actual not administering the test and possibly requiring that person to go back to the station, et cetera, is then potentially putting that person in a different position than an English-speaking person. Because if you are actually, in some cases, using that to make a determination to release the person and let them go on their way, then that person has essentially an advantage that a person who is not an English-speaking person has. So it's a different perspective, I think, on your perspective.
Although when a person hasn't been able to complete standardized field sobriety testings, we still offer them the pre-breath screening test, which is not exactly a breathalyzer. It's just a roadside test that gives us an idea of what their BAC is. And that is pretty much just blowing through a tube, and it gives us a reading right out on a roadway. And I have had cases where, you know, we couldn't do standardized field sobriety testing and still administer a PBT, which would let us know if, in fact, the person should go down to the station or not.
Okay. All right, Mr. Holy.
Sorry. Yeah, I just did a fast search on YouTube.
El talón de su pie delantero debe estar tocando los dedos delanteros de su pie trasero.
So they have, I found a whole channel that just deals with, it's Spanish for cops is what it's called. So they have all this stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. So, you know, I mean, the stuff's available. I think the thing about saying that, you know, 30 days isn't enough, I think there's enough material out there right now to allow us to make.
I think the problem is if the Department of Criminal Justice Services certifies that or not, because we are dealing with the court system that, unfortunately, if the court does not recognize it, then it becomes invalid in the whole arrest. It needs to be a system that's set up by the New York State criminal justice system or a police agency that we know, like what you just played. I have no idea what that's saying, so I wouldn't know if that person is absolutely, telling the person what I need to, the subject, what I need to do.
Well, it's also print, and it's not a video as much as, sound, and they do have it in writing. So, and we've talked about, we have this in a card now, what you read off, to have it translated into Spanish. I can't see any kind of criminal justice saying that you're not doing the right thing. I'm just saying there's probably, I don't want to reinvent the wheel like somebody else said. Some other communities are doing it now.
Right, right. And so, Mr. Williams, I think maybe you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, Officer Chu mostly said what I was going to say. I was just going to point out that any direction you give in Spanish is going to have to be authenticated somehow and be able to be offered into evidence. And any of the other litigators in the chat can feel free to comment on this as well. But just getting a YouTube video sort of read into evidence and authenticated as being an accurate translation would be, I think, problematic and something that a defense attorney would have a field day with. Yeah, getting something authenticated through criminal justice services, I think, would be a way to handle that. And, perhaps that doesn't take too long. I don't know the actual practicalities of getting that done, but that was all I was going to mention.
Okay, so Mr. Pichardo, you wanted to give some input?
No, I was just acknowledging because he's acknowledging about litigators. I'm a litigator, so I've dealt with some of this stuff. So,
okay, Ms. Frederick.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. In terms of authenticating the Spanish in a court of law, how do you go about authenticating Spanish now, for example, with the English-speaking officer trying to use the little Spanish that they know to administer this test?
So I actually can talk on that because I've had to deal with this as a person who prosecuted back in the Department of Labor. Whenever there's a situation of understanding, was this translated accurately, it's brought into court. It's a voir dire, basically, as we say in the criminal justice system. They bring it in. It's something that they do with a suppression hearing to test to say, is this something that they've done under, previous, tests? Has it been authenticated? It's a laundry list thing that they do in the criminal justice part when it comes to a voir dire. That's one of the things. And that's some things as criminal defense attorneys have used to say, no, this is not proper. We're going to test this. We're going to test the validity of this translation. It's just one part of it. There's several other parts with it. I think, Brett, you can touch on that too with it, saying that this is what we do in voir dire on that.
Okay. So, any other council members or committee members? No? Mr. Igo, and then we'll let Ms. Badham speak as
I think this is a great starting point with the Spanish, trying to get that language, that card up to date, whatever. But I know, Jamal, when you first brought this up, we were urging others, I'm not sure, it was just countywide in the area, departments to do the same thing. So maybe if we start with this, maybe DCGS would pick up on it, whatever. And I think in the city of Albany, tell me if I'm wrong, that a lot of DWIs are on I-90 that are done by the troopers, maybe even by the sheriffs. And the sheriffs also come into the city sometimes, depending on what grants they get. So I'd like some consistency, but I think this is a good starting point, and I will go along with it. But I don't think we should lose what we want to, the point we want to get to with it.
Right, and what I would say is, going back to the idea that New York City has these videos that they've been using for a while. Police departments borrow from each other all the time. So that might be an option and a way for us to not recreate the wheel and have to deal with the expense, although I'm sure there probably would be an expense for using theirs. But again, if it's there, it's standardized. I'm sure they've used it in court. Maybe we can borrow from that. And what we'll do is, maybe Chief, you can reach out to, or have someone from your staff reach out to the NYPD and see what they're doing, how they're doing, and if we can borrow from what they're doing, so we're not starting from scratch when they've been doing it for a while.
Yes, indeed. But I'll have somebody follow up on that.
Okay, thank you. And so with that, I'm going to move on to Ms. Badham. I know you've been chomping at the bit and trying to get in. So give us your thoughts and your comments.
Hi, all. Thank you for this time to speak again. Thank you to Chief Hawkins, who made himself available, and to Officer Chu. Officer Chu and I have actually worked together in prosecuting these cases before, and when I came up with the idea, I wanted his input because I wanted to know what was best for the police department in order to go forward. So this idea really came out of speaking with other members as well as Officer Chu, and being able to understand what works for the community, what works for the police department, and what would work in the future. I had this long comment written out, but I think it's better if I just address your concerns. From a prosecutor standpoint, I think that would alleviate some of the questions that you had. Mr. Igo, you stated if we could have a standardized project by phone or cards. Well, there's a couple of problems with that suggestion. One, phones or cards do not allow for officers to simulate these tests. So when you receive these tests in English, officers can demonstrate a certain portion of the test before you actually take the test. Having a card or having a line or a phone call do not allow non-English speakers to have that same advantage, which goes to many of the points that were brought up, having a fair line for everyone. The other problem is, as stated also, is that these are not standardized. So when we go to prosecute these type of cases, if they're not standardized, we are met with lots of pushback, really from juries and then from defense attorneys, as Mr. Williams was stating before. The other portion is, if they are standardized, then we as a county can use that as a baseline to go forward, right? And so we are breaking ground here. It was brought up that New York City has these type of videos available. So it is not standard practice to use these videos. They are available. They just don't use them all the time. The reason why I know that is because these cases are being actively litigated in federal court and as well as state court. So in my research, there was a case called People of New York v. Jose Aviles, which was brought up in 2016, was litigated in 2017. It stated that New York PD officers were trying to use literally just translation from videos, but they weren't standardized, right? And so the court struck down the defendant basically and stated that that standardized videos should be used, but they're not going to do so because they haven't been standardized by DCJS, right? And so this is why this project is so important and why Albany PD's movement is so important, because we are literally breaking ground for the rest of New York State. We can use the language that is used in those videos, as you, Mr. Hoy, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but that you stated, it's just making these videos would then be used statewide. And although there is an expense and there would be some type of effort from the Albany Police Department, there are multiple residents and citizens in the area that would be happy to help with not only Spanish, but any other language. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is when you spoke about language lines and whether language lines could be used. Again, like Officer Chu stated, there are a plethora of dialects, and some of the dialects used in the language lines don't always translate best. The other thing is that I've seen firsthand how interpreters are not that great of interpreters. And it takes a while to get them on the line. And they don't accurately interpret what is being asked of them, especially for legal terms. So having a video that we can use that makes everything fair, that we can use in court, that the police department can rely on, would then allow us to actively pursue these cases from a prosecutor standpoint, while giving the police department the resources that they need. Mr. Williams, hi, by the way. You brought up a concern about questions and answers and about Spanish speakers being able to communicate with the police department. I think this will be a big concern going forward. I think that there is where language line can be used. Like, for example, give me your ID, or do you need to call someone, or do you have someone who could pick up your car? Those kind of questions that are outside of a test settings can be used differently, or we can use Albany Police Department other officers to ask these type of questions, which can be phrased rather easily. But when it comes to standardized tests, we do need one specific test that can be used over and over and over again. You also brought up the talking to the DA's office and talking to the PD's office. So I've been very vigilant to speak to as many people as I can to make sure I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. So DA Soros does know about my initiatives. I did pass along the signed resolution that was brought up before. We have spoken about issues that might arise or the way that this might make it better. I have not spoken to the PD's office, but I have shared it with other assistant public defenders. So this should be an easy feat. I honestly believe that they would welcome such a movement because it would help them defending these cases, right? Miss Dochette, you guys believe, you spoke to her as Judy, but I'm not trying to be rude. So you asked about treating these experiences for non-English speakers in the tablet sense as the same as English speakers and when they are taken back to the station. So Officer Chu is absolutely correct. There are many situations that would allow English speakers to go back to the station that are not questioned. If there's snow on the floor, if it's raining, if they don't have proper shoes on, if there's a heavy amount of traffic, or if there's lights that would mess with the test. Those kinds of settings would push officers to go back to the station. So it's not that they are at an unfair advantage or disadvantage. It is the environment that occurs during that DWI stop. I hope this answered some of your questions, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Brought up one question for yourself or Officer Chu. Has it ever the problem of not being able to speak or hearing impaired? What did they do in that case? That's just as important with the, the language. So I don't know if that's has ever been an issue in court or an issue in the APD or anybody that you know of, because you see it more and more every day.
So I have seen this issue, and that's why videos are so important and why I believe Officer Chu's suggestion is very important. Because with a language line, you can't use your hands, you can't sign these out. As long if you have videos, you can use those sign language tools, and you can also demonstrate these tests, which is like a major component. You are literally putting everyone in the same arena.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, the ordinance is calling for standardized field sobriety tests. Albany Police Department shall provide standardized field sobriety tests in the Spanish language. What does that look like? Before we get to voting and move ahead, I mean, it's just a pretty plain statement. What do we mean? What do we expect? What are our expectations? Is it the card? Is it the video? Is how are we doing this? Mr. Ballerin.
I mean, I liked what the officer said. I mean, if this is what would work best for our officers and it's going to be the fair system, I think the video is something that I would think is suitable. I mean, if it works on both systems, with our officers that are dealing with individuals, it makes everyone's life a little easier, and it's still suitable for court purposes, then I would say, the video sounds like that's the best way to go.
Right. Okay. And I agree with that. So, but from this point, so we're trying to turn this around in 30 days, which it may or may not work. we're talking about APD creating this video, but the thing is, wouldn't DCJS have to sign off on it as being the standardized way of doing that, Officer Chu?
So Kelly, for it to like literally be recognized in court, DCGS would have to certify it. Like I said, I could reach out to my contacts in DCGS that I was making the English speaking videos with and get their input, because this was something that they were interested in working on in the future anyway.
Okay. Ms. Frederick, do you have your hand up, or you just adjusting your camera? Okay, so you're going to have to connect with DCJS. Again, if we pass this, then it takes effect in 30 days. So we really want to be careful with that. And again, we don't want to rush it. And I understand that we want to get something in place. You're reaching out to DCJS and making that stuff, that contact, Officer Chu. I mean, what are we talking for turnaround time and?
So that really depends on the state. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the English-speaking videos actually got put on pause. If they go up and running, to film the videos is a week process, about a week to film the videos, and then it's a matter of them doing their video and editing to actually form them into videos. So we were on the last leg of the testing process because there's 3 tests that are standardized. We were on that last test filming when the pandemic broke out and everything got put on pause.
Yeah, okay. Right, so how about, I mean, because we all agree this is a good thing and we need to move on this.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hoey has a question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Sure. My question is, could we do, like, ask the makers of this to do an amendment that 90 days it would take effect, if not sooner? Have some kind of way that if we could get it done sooner, we could get it started because of the time with the video. I just want to run it by the makers of the resolution.
Kelly?
So are we required by...
Mr. Robinson, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Are we required by charter for an ordinance to take effect 30 days after it is passed, or is that a thing we are able to amend?
We can amend it.
It could be shorter.
The reason why I put the 30-day effect in there for you, Councilman Robinson, is because of the transition to let the APD to adjust to the new policy.
Right.
Well, can I suggest that we could take care of that with the effective date and say upon approval of DCJS and try working with them? Because it sounds like we need them and they're close to it, but we're saying 30 days, it's not done. It kind of covers us in APD by saying upon approval of DCJS. Something the effective date could take care of our issue, I believe.
And we could also pass it, because I think we're all in agreement. We support this and want it to happen out of committee and just hold it pending these actions, and then move forward. You know, so we're already out of committee. It's approved, and we can pass it.
I'll make that motion then. We can report it out of committee and hold it until approval of DCJS.
Second.
Okay. So, Mr. Ballard?
I just want to, what are we voting on?
I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
I believe the idea is to move it out of committee with a positive recommendation pending DCJS approval. So it would move out. We wouldn't have to come back and do the approval. We'd be kind of in a holding pattern until we got everything finalized before final passage.
But I thought that I was with Councilmember Hoey's position on giving it a 90-day. I think that motion fine. Or that suggestion was on the floor, you know what I mean, that we can pass it out of committee, pass it on the floor, and then that there's still a 90-day turnaround for that ordinance to take effect. instead of just passing it and holding it on the agenda.
Okay.
I don't.
No,
see
that's fine. Whatever. So again, I don't know that was Mr. Igo's motion. So let's restate the motion.
So what we're doing is we're asking the members who presented this if they accept the 90 days. So let's just make everyone accept the 90 days. Everyone's okay with that?
I'm fine with
Ms. Frederick, Mr.
Okay
Ballard, you're all okay with that? Okay.
I withdraw my motion and that.
Okay, so now the new motion, I need a motion.
I'll make a
motion that we move this out of committee with a favorable recommendation and just amend it from 30 days to 90 days to take effect.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so it's unanimous. So the motion passes. So Chief, you said you were going to work with trying to connect with NYPD to get some idea on that. That will be helpful. And Officer Chu, are you still here? I don't see you on my screen.
I'm here.
Okay, so yeah, and so you're going to connect with DCJS so we can try to see how we can move forward with this.
And I think that the important part is Council Badham, as she stated, the videos by NYPD aren't recognized by the state either. So there's a lot of legal issues with their videos. So reaching out to NYPD is okay to the point of seeing where they got the videos from and how they were made. But we really need to work on getting something that would be state approved so it doesn't cause a hindrance in the court process.
Okay, so you got 90 days.
Oh, great.
All right, to work through this. So,
motion to adjourn?
Yes, if no one has anything else, motion to adjourn.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes, and thank you to the sponsors for putting this forth.
All right, have a good evening.
All right.
Thank you officers for being here.